The vast council chamber of Andaris Prime glittered with the cold luminescence of 1,000 crystalline panels, each pulsing faintly in rhythm with the station's life support systems. At the center of the chamber, the victors and vanquished of the Galactic War faced one another, separated by a polished obsidian table that seemed too pristine to host such heavy decisions. On one side, humanity's representatives sat rigid, their faces etched with the fatigue of war and the cautious hope of survival. Admiral Myra Detrell, her uniform adorned with faded commendations, presided over them with a stony expression, her gaze fixed on the alien woman seated across from her. Commander Zevara of the Oran Dominion was unlike any adversary humanity had faced. Her iridescent skin shimmered subtly with colors that shifted like oil on water, and her long braided hair, silver and streaked with violet, framed sharp, otherworldly features. Her eyes, an unsettling shade of deep cerulean, seemed to pierce through the very fabric of pretense. She was clad in ceremonial armor that exuded an air of power, sleek, almost organic, and faintly glowing along its seams. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to being challenged. "We have no need for your precious metals or your technology. The Oran Dominion seeks only one thing from humanity, as a gesture of peace." The room held its collective breath. "I request—" Zevara paused, her gaze sweeping over the humans like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Sergeant Ezra Colby." The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to absorb the chamber's ambient hum. Every face turned toward Ezra, who was leaning back in his chair at the far end of the human delegation, a half-eaten protein bar dangling from his hand. Ezra blinked. I'm sorry, I think I misheard. Did you just say me?" Zevara's expression remained unreadable, though there was a flicker of something amusement in her gaze. "Yes, you." The chamber erupted. Military advisors and diplomats burst into frantic whispers, their voices overlapping in a chaotic cacophony. "Why him?" one advisor demanded, his face flushed. "This is highly irregular," barked another. Ezra raised his hand. "Yeah, I'd like to second that. Also, third it. What the hell is going on?" Admiral Detrell rapped the table for silence, though her own composure seemed precarious. "Commander Zevara," she said, her voice tight. "Sergeant Colby is a decorated soldier. He is not a commodity to be traded." "I am not proposing a trade," Zevara replied evenly. "This is my sole request. The terms of peace hinge upon it." Ezra snorted. "Wow. No pressure, huh?" Detrell shot him a glare that could have melted titanium. "Sergeant, not now." But Zevara's gaze was fixed solely on Ezra. "You intrigue me, Sergeant Colby. During the war, your actions stood out, not merely for your skill, but for your unique approach to conflict." Ezra rubbed the back of his neck. "If by unique you mean the time I convinced an Oran battle droid to self-destruct by pretending to be its long-lost uncle, then yeah, I guess I've got a signature style." A ripple of laughter, nervous, incredulous, swept through the human side of the room. Zevara's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, a sight so rare it sent a shiver down the spine of her own delegation. Admiral Detrell leaned forward, her tone icy. "Commander, I fail to see how this request is relevant to our negotiations." "It is relevant because I deem it so," Zevara replied, her calm demeanor unshaken. "The Oran Dominion seeks understanding. Sergeant Colby embodies the spirit of your species in a way no artifact or treaty could convey." Ezra raised both hands in mock surrender. "Look, I'm flattered, really. But I don't think I'm exactly ambassador material. I mean, I once got demoted for setting off a fireworks display during a supply run. Long story, but it turns out alien sparklers are a lot more combustible than Earth ones." A few chuckles escaped the human delegation, but Detrell's scowl deepened. "Sergeant, enough." Zevara tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made Ezra squirm. "Your humor is unorthodox, but it serves as a defense mechanism, does it not? A way to navigate chaos." Ezra scratched his chin. "Or maybe I'm just naturally charming. Hard to say." The alien commander leaned back, her expression inscrutable once more. My request stands. If humanity values peace, it will grant me this." The chamber descended into chaos again, but Ezra found himself oddly calm. He wasn't sure whether to be flattered, terrified, or deeply concerned that his life had become the punchline to some interstellar joke. Finally, Admiral Dutrell called for a recess, and the human delegation retreated to a private chamber. Ezra, despite his protests, was dragged along. "This is absurd," Dutrell fumed. "We cannot allow her to take one of our soldiers as if he were some kind of intergalactic door prize," Ezra offered helpfully. The Admiral shot him a look that could have vaporized asteroids. "You're not helping." Ezra sighed, leaning against the wall. "Look, I'm as confused as anyone, but if she's serious about this being the only thing she wants, maybe we should consider it. I mean, it beats handing over a moon or something, right?" The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Dutrell exhaled heavily. "We'll deliberate. But know this, Sergeant. If we agree to this, your actions will reflect on all of humanity. You cannot afford to make a mockery of this situation." Ezra grinned, his usual irreverence shining through. "No promises, ma'am, but I'll do my best to make humanity look slightly less embarrassing than we already do." As the delegation filed out, Ezra remained behind for a moment, staring out the viewport at the Oran flagship looming against the stars. "Well," he muttered to himself, "this should be interesting." The Oran flagship, the opalescent star, loomed like a colossal jewel suspended in the void. Its surface shimmered with shifting hues, casting an eerie, hypnotic glow over the small human shuttle carrying Sergeant Ezra Colby toward his improbable new destiny. Ezra sat strapped into his seat, staring at the alien craft through the shuttle's viewport, his thoughts a tangle of unease and disbelief. "Still can't believe this is happening," he muttered, breaking the silence. Across from him, Lieutenant Mallory, the shuttle's pilot, raised an eyebrow. "Honestly, neither can I. You must have made one hell of an impression." Ezra smirked. "Impression? Sure. I've got a gift for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Guess it finally paid off." Mallory chuckled, shaking her head. "You realize they might dissect you, right?" Ezra leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. I figure if they wanted to dissect me, they'd start with someone less sarcastic. My body's probably 60% snark by now. It'd ruin their instruments." The shuttle docked with the opalescent star in a seamless ballet of light and movement. As the airlock hissed open, a delegation of Auran awaited them, their glowing attire and unnervingly symmetrical features making Ezra feel like he'd stepped into a fashion-forward fever dream. One of them stepped forward, tall and composed, with eyes the color of a summer sky. "Welcome, Sergeant Colby. I am First Advisor Koresh. Commander Zavara awaits you." Ezra glanced at Mallory. "Well, guess this is where I get probed." He turned back to Koresh with a grin. "Lead the way, Chief." Koresh blinked, clearly unsure what to make of the comment, but said nothing as he gestured for Ezra to follow. The corridors of the opalescent star were an exercise in otherworldly design. Organic curves replaced sharp edges, and the walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. Strange luminescent flora lined the hallways, casting a soft bioluminescent glow that reminded Ezra of deep-sea creatures. "Nice digs," Ezra quipped. "I'm guessing your decorator skipped IKEA." Koresh didn't respond, though one of the other Orans seemed to stifle a chuckle. Eventually, they reached a set of towering doors that opened with a whisper, revealing a chamber bathed in silver light. At its center stood Commander Zavara, her armor exchanged for a flowing robe that shimmered like liquid metal. She looked up as Ezra entered, her piercing gaze locking onto his with an intensity that made him momentarily forget how to breathe. "Sergeant Colby," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "Welcome to the opalescent star. I trust your journey was uneventful." Ezra gave a mock salute. Uneventful as a trip to the DMV, except with fewer forms and more existential dread. Zavara tilted her head, the faintest hint of amusement flickering across her features. "Your humor remains singular." "What can I say? It's a coping mechanism," Ezra replied, shoving his hands into his pockets. "So, what's the plan, Commander? Are we doing trust falls, or should I just start handing out dating resumes?" A ripple of laughter swept through the Orin attendants, though they quickly stifled it under Zavara's sharp glance. She dismissed them with a wave of her hand, leaving only her and Ezra in the chamber. "You misunderstand the purpose of your presence here," Zavara said, stepping closer. "This is not a mere whim, Sergeant. You represent something rare, something I believe my people and yours must learn from." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "I'm flattered, really, but I think you might be overestimating me. I'm just a guy who survived because I'm good at running and talking my way out of trouble." Zavara's expression softened, her gaze thoughtful. "Perhaps. Or perhaps that adaptability is precisely why you are here. Humor, after all, is not a trait we Orin cultivate. It is foreign to us, yet it intrigues me." Ezra couldn't help but chuckle. "So, you're saying I'm some kind of intergalactic comedy ambassador? Should I start with knock-knock jokes, or do you prefer puns?" Zavara didn't laugh, but her lips twitched in a way that suggested she was trying to suppress one. "There is time to explore that later. For now, I have arranged quarters for you. I trust you will find them comfortable." Ezra's quarters turned out to be far more luxurious than he'd expected. The bed was a marvel of alien engineering, adjusting its shape and firmness as he lay on it. A console on the wall displayed holographic projections of Orin landscapes, their colors vivid and surreal. He paced the room, trying to process the surreal turn his life had taken. He was used to danger, sure, but this wasn't the kind he could punch or shoot his way out of. Just as he was contemplating whether the glowing orb in the corner was a lamp or some kind of alien surveillance device, the door chimed. "Enter," he called, half expecting Zavara herself. Instead, it was Koresh, holding a tray with what looked like a bowl of shimmering liquid. "Your evening sustenance," Koresh announced, setting it down on a nearby table. Ezra eyed the bowl suspiciously. "Is it gonna sprout tentacles and try to eat me?" Koresh frowned. "It is nutrient-rich synth gel, quite palatable." Ezra grabbed a spoon and scooped up a bit of the gel, sniffing it cautiously before taking a tentative bite. To his surprise, it tasted like a mix of honey and citrus. "Not bad," he admitted before smirking. "But if this is alien haute cuisine, you're gonna love Earth tacos." Koresh gave him a blank look. "Tacos?" Ezra grinned. "Stick around, Koresh. I'll change your life." Later that night, as he lay in the shifting embrace of the alien bed, Ezra stared at the ceiling, which displayed a soft aurora-like glow. "What the hell have I gotten myself into?" he muttered to himself. Somewhere in the vast ship, Zavara stood on a balcony overlooking the stars, her thoughts lingering on the strange human, now under her care. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faint stirrings of something she couldn't quite name, and, in his own way, Ezra was beginning to feel it too. Morning, or whatever passed for it on an alien ship orbiting in deep space, arrived with a soft chiming noise, and the walls of Ezra's quarters gradually brightening from violet to gold. Ezra groaned, rolling over in the bed that had somehow contorted itself into the perfect shape to support his sleep-twisted limbs. "Great, my alarm clock has a light show," he muttered, swinging his legs out of bed. He squinted at the holographic panel on the wall. "Is this thing touchscreen or mind-reading? Because I gotta warn you, I think in cartoons before coffee." Before he could poke at the display, the door slid open, and Koresh stepped in, his posture as stiff and formal as ever. "Good morning, Sergeant Colby," Koresh said, his voice devoid of any of the cheerfulness the phrase usually implied. "The commander requests your presence in the observation chamber." Ezra smirked. "Let me guess, she finally wants to hear that knock-knock joke I've been working on." Koresh blinked. "Knock, knock?" "It's a human thing," Ezra said, waving a hand. "Lead on, Chief. Let's see what the commander has cooked up for me today." The observation chamber turned out to be a vast, dome-like room with a panoramic view of the stars. The floor was a seamless expanse of reflective material that gave the unnerving impression of walking on glass suspended in the void. Ezra did his best not to look down too much. Commander Zevara stood at the center, gazing out at the swirling nebulae beyond. Her robe today was a deep, shimmering indigo, and her silver hair was loosely braided, falling over one shoulder. "You wanted to see me?" Ezra said, stepping into the room. "Or is this just a scenic spot for some light existential pondering?" Zevara turned, her expression as composed as ever. "Sergeant Colby, I hope you're finding your accommodations suitable." Ezra shrugged. "Can't complain. Your nutrient gel's pretty tasty, and the bed's smarter than I am. Although I gotta say, your TV options are lacking. No reruns of Galaxy Cop, Space Justice. A real travesty." Zevara tilted her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'm unfamiliar with this Space Justice, but perhaps it is something you can enlighten us about in time." "Careful what you wish for," Ezra said with a grin. Zevara gestured toward the stars. "Do you know where we are, Sergeant?" Ezra squinted at the swirling colors of the nebula. "Somewhere far enough from Earth that my Amazon Prime membership's useless?" She didn't laugh, but the slight lift of her eyebrows suggested she found his quips amusing. "This is the Vorel Expanse, a region of space unclaimed by any faction, yet rich with phenomena that remain unexplored even by my people." Ezra crossed his arms. "Sounds pretty, but I'm guessing you didn't bring me here for a sightseeing tour. What's the deal, Commander? You keep saying I'm here for some grand purpose, but all I've done so far is crack jokes and confuse your crew." Zevara's gaze turned serious, the levity in her expression fading. "You are here because you represent something my people have lost, or perhaps never truly possessed. Resilience, adaptability, and something far less tangible but equally vital." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Charm, good looks, and impeccable comic timing?" "Humor," Zevara said, her tone firm. "The ability to find light in darkness. It is an alien concept to us, yet one I believe holds great value." Ezra blinked. "Wait, are you saying you don't have humor? Like, at all?" Zevara hesitated. "Not in the way humans do. For the Auran, emotions are controlled, disciplined. What you call humor often appears to us as frivolous or irrational. But during the war, I observed how your kind used it to endure even the direst situations. I believe there is strength in it, a strength we must learn if we are to coexist." Ezra scratched his head. "So let me get this straight. You picked me because I'm the class clown?" Zevara's lips twitched again, but her expression remained composed. "If that is how you wish to frame it, then yes." Ezra couldn't help but laugh. "Well, I guess I've been called worse. So what's next? Comedy lessons. Should I start with slapstick or work my way up to stand-up?" "There is something I wish to show you first," Zevara said, turning back toward the stars. Moments later, Ezra found himself in a smaller chamber filled with holographic displays and strange instruments that hummed faintly. In the center of the room was a pedestal holding a crystal-like object that pulsed with a soft inner light. "This," Zevara said, gesturing to the object, "is an Auran memory shard. It contains the recorded experiences of one of our most revered thinkers." "Neat," Ezra said, leaning closer. "Looks like a fancy paperweight. What's it do?" Zevara placed her hand over the shard, and the room filled with a cascade of images and sounds, alien landscapes, mathematical equations, and snatches of conversation in a melodic, untranslatable language. "It is a repository of knowledge," Zevara explained. "Each shard is a fragment of our collective understanding. But there are gaps, concepts we cannot fully grasp because they lie outside our experience." Ezra nodded slowly, beginning to see where this was going. "And you think I can help fill those gaps? With humor?" "Among other things," Zevara said. "Your perspective is unique. Your ability to think laterally, to find meaning in chaos. It is something we Auran lack. I believe you can teach us, even as we teach you." Ezra scratched his chin. "You know, most people just ask for a PowerPoint presentation. But hey, if you want to go full interstellar think tank, I'm game." Zevara inclined her head. "I appreciate your willingness, Sergeant." "Willingness?" Ezra said with a smirk. Let's just say I'm curious where this roller coaster's headed, but don't blame me if your people start telling bad dad jokes by the end of this." Zavara's faint smile returned. "I shall consider that a risk worth taking." As Ezra left the chamber, he found himself thinking about Zavara's words. For all his bravado and sarcasm, he couldn't deny the strange sense of purpose her mission gave him. "Guess I'm not just comic relief anymore," he muttered, a small grin tugging at his lips. Somewhere in the depths of the opalescent star, Zavara watched the memory shard flicker and wondered if, perhaps, she had found more in Ezra than she had intended. Ezra stood in the middle of what the Orin called the Harmony Hall, a sprawling chamber with concentric rings of seating that radiated from a central dais. Every detail of the room, its glowing walls, softly resonating hum, and shifting holograms, was designed to create an aura of calm and order. It would have been impressive, even majestic, if not for one glaring issue. It was packed to the brim with solemn-faced Orin, all staring at him expectantly. "This," Ezra muttered under his breath, "is how I die." Zavara stepped to his side, her presence calm but commanding. "The Harmony Assembly is eager to witness your methods firsthand, Sergeant Colby. I trust you are ready." "Ready? Sure," Ezra said, giving her a sidelong glance. "I've done tons of stand-up in front of an alien audience with zero sense of humor. Happens all the time." Zavara regarded him with a faint smile that bordered on sympathy. "They are not here to judge, but to learn. Simply speak as you would among your own kind." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "You've clearly never met my kind. We heckle for sport." Still, he stepped onto the dais, taking a deep breath as the shimmering holographic lights adjusted to spotlight him. The murmurs of the assembled Orin faded, their bioluminescent eyes fixed on him with unnerving intensity. Ezra cleared his throat. "All right," he began, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Let's start with something simple. A question. What's the deal with spaceship food?" Silence. "See, on Earth," Ezra continued, undeterred, "people complain about airplane food. But trust me, after a week of nutrient gel, I'd trade an entire Orin starfighter for a bag of airline peanuts." A few Orin blinked, one in the back tilted their head, clearly pondering the concept of peanuts. "Okay, tough crowd," Ezra said with a grin. "Let's switch gears. You know what my first thought was when I stepped onto your ship? Wow, these guys have really nailed the whole glowing everything aesthetic. Are you secretly powered by rave music?" This earned him a quiet, startled chuckle from one of the younger Orin near the front. It wasn't much, but it was enough to embolden him. As the session progressed, Ezra leaned into his strength, telling stories. He regaled the assembly with tales of his basic training mishaps, exaggerated accounts of Earth's peculiar customs, and even an entirely fictional account of a human Orin dance-off during the war, complete with slapstick descriptions of alien missteps. By the time he reached the punchline of a particularly absurd anecdote involving an exploding hover scooter, a ripple of laughter swept through the hall. It wasn't the roaring kind he was used to on Earth, but it was genuine, and it sparked something almost electric in the air. Zavara, watching from the sidelines, noted the subtle shifts in her people's demeanor, the slight loosening of their postures, the flickers of curiosity and amusement. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. When Ezra finished, he stepped down from the dais, wiping an imaginary bead of sweat from his brow. "Well, that was a rush. Think I earned a medal for bravery in there?" "You did well," Zavara said, her tone warm. "Though I suspect you enjoyed yourself more than you anticipated." Ezra smirked. "Hey, if you can make aliens laugh at a fart joke, you're basically invincible." Zavara arched an eyebrow. "Fart joke?" "Don't worry about it," Ezra said quickly, waving a hand. "You've got bigger fish to fry. Speaking of which, do you guys have fish? Because I could really go for some tacos right now." Later, as Ezra strolled through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, Koresh appeared at his side. The Orin advisor's expression was as neutral as ever, but Ezra could swear there was a faint air of bemusement about him. "Your presentation was unconventional," Koresh said after a moment. Unconventional is my middle name, Ezra replied. Well, technically it's David, but unconventional sounds cooler. Koresh blinked. I fail to see how humor serves a practical function. Laughter does not resolve conflict or enhance productivity. Ezra stopped walking and turned to face him. You're not wrong, Koresh. Laughter doesn't build spaceships or win wars. But you know what it does? It makes all the tough stuff a little easier to handle. It reminds people they're not alone. And sometimes that's enough to get through the worst days. Koresh tilted his head, as if analyzing Ezra's words from every angle. Fascinating. And yet, it seems inefficient. Life's not always efficient, Ezra said with a shrug, but it's a hell of a lot better with a few laughs along the way. Ezra's newfound role as the Auron's unofficial comedy ambassador wasn't without its challenges. Over the next several days, he found himself inundated with questions from curious Auron, each one more baffling than the last. Sergeant Colby, one asked during a meal in the communal dining hall, this knock-knock ritual, does it serve a diplomatic function among humans? Sure, let's go with that, Ezra said, trying not to choke on his synth gel. Another time, a scientist cornered him in a corridor to ask about the deeper cultural significance of the phrase dad joke. It's complicated, Ezra had said, desperately searching for an escape. But trust me, you don't want to open that can of worms. Still, there were moments of genuine connection. He taught Koresh how to deliver a punchline, with mixed results, and introduced a group of Auron engineers to Earth's concept of sarcasm, which they found both perplexing and oddly intriguing. And through it all, Zavara watched, her admiration for the peculiar human growing with each passing day. The one evening, as Ezra sat alone in his quarters, nursing a strange glowing drink the Auron called celestial nectar, Zavara entered unannounced. Commander, Ezra said, raising his glass, to what do I owe the pleasure? I wish to thank you, she said, stepping closer. Your efforts have had a profound impact. My people are beginning to see the value in what you offer. Ezra smiled. All in a day's work. Although, if you really want to thank me, you could arrange for some Earth pizza to be delivered. Galactic delivery fees be damned. Zavara chuckled softly, a sound so rare that it caught Ezra off guard. You surprise me, Sergeant Colby, she said, her gaze steady. Perhaps more than I anticipated. Ezra raised an eyebrow. Careful, Commander. You're starting to sound like you enjoy my company. Perhaps I do, she said simply, turning to leave. As the door closed behind her, Ezra stared after her, a bemused smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, he said to himself, taking another sip of the glowing drink. This is going to get interesting. Ezra had faced alien armies, navigated the labyrinthine halls of an extraterrestrial starship, and even performed impromptu stand-up for an audience of humorless Auron. But none of that had prepared him for this. He stood in the center of a vast training arena, its walls shimmering with ever-shifting holographic patterns, surrounded by Auron warriors in gleaming ceremonial armor. Each held a staff-like weapon crackling faintly with blue energy, their expressions calm and inscrutable. At the far end of the arena, Zavara watched, her posture regal, a faint smile tugging at her lips. This isn't exactly what I had in mind when you said cultural exchange, Commander, Ezra called out, nervously eyeing the nearest warrior. It is customary among the Auron to exchange skills as a sign of mutual respect, Zavara said, her tone measured. You have shared your humor. Now they will share their combat techniques. Ezra let out a shaky laugh. Right. Because what's more respectful than me getting my butt kicked by a bunch of glowing space ninjas? Zavara's smile widened ever so slightly. They have been instructed to exercise restraint. Fantastic, Ezra muttered, rolling his shoulders. Restraint. My favorite word when it comes to sparring. For the first challenger stepped forward, a tall Auron with a lithe frame and glowing teal markings that pulsed rhythmically. He spun his staff with a flourish before taking a ready stance. Okay, Ezra said, raising his hands. Ground rules. No face shots, no broken bones, and if you sweep the leg, I'm calling it a foul. The Orin warrior tilted his head, clearly not understanding, before lunging forward. Ezra yelped and ducked, narrowly avoiding the crackling end of the staff. He backpedaled, waving his arms. Whoa, whoa, easy there, Bruce Lee of the cosmos. I bruise like a peach. The warrior hesitated, glancing at Zavara as if to confirm whether this level of protest was part of the ritual. Zavara gave a subtle nod, her expression unreadable. Taking a deep breath, Ezra tried to focus. His military training kicked in, sort of. He managed to dodge and weave, occasionally blocking strikes with a technique that could generously be described as panic-fueled flailing. By the time the sparring session ended, Ezra was sprawled on the floor, panting, but mercifully uninjured. The warriors surrounded him, their glowing eyes filled with something resembling curiosity. I don't know what's worse, Ezra groaned, getting smacked around by a staff or realizing you're all better at this than I'll ever be. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, holding out a hand to help him up. Ezra accepted, pulling himself to his feet with a grimace. Thanks, buddy, he said. You got a name, or should I just call you Captain Fancy Staff? The warrior's lips twitched, the closest thing Ezra had seen to a smile. My designation is Lether, he said in a melodic voice, and your movements are unconventional. Unconventional is code for terrible, right? Ezra said, brushing himself off. Lether inclined his head. Perhaps there is merit in unpredictability. Ezra chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. Later, in the communal hall, Ezra found himself surrounded by a group of Orin eager to learn more about human culture. He sat cross-legged on a floating cushion, trying not to spill the glowing drink in his hand as he fielded their questions. What is the significance of the high five? One asked, their tone serious. It's, a gesture of camaraderie, Ezra explained, demonstrating by slapping his palm against Koresh's, much to the advisor's visible discomfort. And this dancing you mentioned? Another inquired. Ezra smirked. Oh, you guys are gonna love this. Someone cue up a beat. Before long, Ezra was leading an impromptu dance lesson, teaching the Orin everything from the moonwalk to the Macarena. The sight of normally stoic warriors attempting to mimic his awkward moves was enough to send him into fits of laughter. Even Koresh, after much coaxing, gave it a try, his stiff, robotic movements earning a round of applause and a rare grin from Ezra. Not bad, Koresh. You're like a majestic, glow-in-the-dark scarecrow. Amid the laughter and shared moments, Ezra noticed Zavara standing at the edge of the gathering, observing with a soft, thoughtful expression. He excused himself and approached her, holding out a second glowing drink. Not joining in? He asked, offering the cup. Zavara accepted it with a nod. I find it more rewarding to observe. Your ability to unite such different minds through something as simple as movement is remarkable. Dance brings people together, Ezra said with a grin. It's a universal truth, even when you've got two left feet. Zavara's gaze softened. You continue to surprise me, Sergeant Colby. You possess a rare gift for bridging divides. Aw, shucks, Commander, Ezra said, mockingly tipping an imaginary hat. You're gonna make me blush. She chuckled softly, a sound that made Ezra pause. You should do that more often, he said. Do what? Laugh, Ezra said, leaning against a nearby pillar. It suits you. For the first time, Zavara looked genuinely caught off guard. She quickly recovered, her usual poise returning, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Perhaps, she said quietly, you are teaching me more than I anticipated. As the evening wound down, Ezra found himself once again reflecting on the strange path his life had taken. He hadn't expected to bond with an alien crew, or to become a de facto ambassador of human absurdity. But as he watched the Orin laugh and dance, their luminous forms casting rippling patterns of light across the room, he felt a surprising sense of fulfillment. Not bad for a guy who started out as a war prize, he muttered to himself, raising his glass in a silent toast. Somewhere across the room, Zavara's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, they shared a smile that seemed to transcend words. The universe, Ezra thought, was full of surprises, and he was beginning to think he might actually like that. The Auran starship glided through the void, its sleek, bioluminescent hull casting faint ripples of light into the surrounding darkness. Inside, Ezra found himself in yet another strange and wonderful situation, navigating a multi-dimensional anomaly that had just been detected on the ship's long-range scanners. "Explain it to me like I'm 5, Ezra said, leaning against the glowing console in the bridge. "What's a quantum rift, and why does it sound like the title of a bad sci-fi movie?" Koresh turned from the console, his expression as grave as always. A quantum rift is a phenomenon where the fabric of space-time fractures, creating unstable pockets of alternate dimensions. These rifts can be highly dangerous if left unchecked. Ezra blinked. "So, cosmic potholes?" Koresh frowned. "If that analogy aids your understanding, then..." "Yes." "Great," Ezra said with a grin. "Let's just slap some duct tape on it and call it a day." Zavara, standing near the viewport, allowed herself a faint smile. "Unfortunately, Sergeant, duct tape is not a viable solution. However, we have protocols for navigating such anomalies. Your presence, while not essential, may prove illuminating." "Ah, so you're saying you need my moral support," Ezra said, crossing his arms. "Don't worry, I've got you covered. I'll even bring snacks." As the ship approached the rift, the view outside the viewport transformed. The blackness of space gave way to swirling colors, violet, gold, and deep indigo, dancing like an ethereal aurora. The sight was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, until the ship began to shudder. "What's happening?" Ezra asked, gripping the edge of a console for balance. "The rift's gravitational waves are destabilizing our trajectory," Koresh said, his fingers flying over the holographic controls. "I am compensating, but the energy fluctuations are unpredictable." "Translation: we're wobbling like a drunk pilot," Ezra muttered. Zavara stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Engage the harmonic stabilizers and recalibrate the inertial dampeners. We must align our trajectory with the rift's resonance." "Do I even want to know what any of that means?" Ezra asked. "No," Zavara replied without missing a beat. The ship's shuddering subsided, and the glowing patterns outside the viewport began to shift. For a moment, everything seemed eerily still. Then, without warning, the rift opened wider, pulling the ship into its depths. Ezra felt his stomach lurch as the world around him warped. Colors bled together, and for a split second, he could swear he saw versions of himself standing in the same spot, some older, some younger, and one wearing what appeared to be a Hawaiian shirt. Is anyone else seeing this?" he asked, pointing at the distorted figures. "It is merely an effect of dimensional overlap," Koresh said, though his voice betrayed a hint of unease. "I'll take your word for it," Ezra said, swallowing hard. "But if I start hearing the theme from the Twilight Zone, I'm out." Then the ship emerged on the other side of the rift, and the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. But their respite was short-lived. The view outside the viewport revealed a strange alien world, one that seemed to defy logic. Floating islands drifted through the air, connected by shimmering bridges of light. Massive crystalline structures jutted from the ground, refracting the sunlight into dazzling rainbows. And in the distance, a colossal, serpent-like creature with iridescent scales coiled around a spire, its eyes glowing with a fierce intelligence. "Welcome to the other side," Ezra said, his voice laced with awe. "I gotta say, your Rift tourism brochures don't do this place justice." Zavara tilted her head, studying the scene with a mix of fascination and caution. "This dimension is unique, but we cannot linger. The rift may destabilize further. Right, Ezra said, tearing his gaze away from the serpent. So how do we get out of here? Koresh gestured to a holographic display. We must locate the rift's epicenter and stabilize its resonance using the ship's harmonic projectors. However, doing so may attract the attention of local entities. Local entities, Ezra repeated. You mean like that giant space snake? Koresh nodded solemnly. Fantastic, Ezra said, clapping his hands. Let's poke the cosmic bear and hope it doesn't bite. As the crew worked to locate the rift's epicenter, Ezra found himself exploring the ship's lower decks with Zavara. She explained that they needed to recalibrate the harmonic projectors manually, which required venturing into the ship's more remote sections. You know, Ezra said as they navigated a narrow corridor, this is starting to feel like one of those horror movies where the characters split up and get picked off one by one. Zavara raised an eyebrow. Is that a common occurrence in human narratives? More common than it should be, Ezra said with a smirk. But don't worry, Commander. If any alien monsters show up, I'll heroically hide behind you. Zavara chuckled softly. I appreciate your honesty, Sergeant. When they reached the projector room, a cavernous chamber filled with glowing machinery and intricate circuitry. Zavara began recalibrating the controls while Ezra stood guard, his eyes darting nervously to the shadows. So, Ezra said, trying to break the tension, ever think about what you'd do if you weren't leading a starship crew through interdimensional chaos? Zavara paused, considering the question. I have always served my people. It is difficult to imagine another path. Come on, Ezra pressed. There's got to be something. Gardening, painting, competitive laser tag? Zavara allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps I would study music. The harmonics of sound and its effect on living beings have always fascinated me. Ezra grinned. Music, huh? I can see it now. Zavara, intergalactic DJ. You'd crush it at raves. Before Zavara could respond, the ship shuddered violently, and a low guttural roar echoed through the corridors. What was that? Ezra asked, his humor evaporating. Zavara's expression turned serious. It seems we have attracted the attention of the local entities. Ezra sighed, readying his blaster. Great. Just another day in paradise. As the ship's alarms blared, the crew scrambled to defend against the serpent-like creature which had begun circling the vessel. Its glowing eyes fixed on the ship, and its massive jaws opened, releasing a pulse of energy that rocked the entire structure. Ezra and Zavara returned to the bridge, where Koresh was directing the defense efforts. We must distract the entity long enough to stabilize the rift, Koresh said. Ezra cracked his knuckles. Distracted, huh? Lucky for you, distraction is my specialty. What do you propose? Zavara asked, her tone cautious. Ezra grinned. I'm going to give it a reason to chase me. Zavara's eyes widened. That is highly dangerous. Danger's my middle name, Ezra said, already heading for the hangar. Isn't it David? Koresh asked. Ezra smirked. Details. Moments later, Ezra piloted a small fighter out of the ship, weaving through the floating islands as the serpent pursued him. He taunted it over the comms, cracking jokes and making absurd gestures to keep its attention. You want me, big guy? Come and get me. Despite the chaos, Ezra couldn't help but laugh as he narrowly avoided the serpent's attacks. For all its danger, there was a strange beauty to this dimension, a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, there was wonder to be found. Back on the ship, Zavara and Koresh worked tirelessly to stabilize the rift. As the harmonics aligned, the serpent let out a final roar before retreating into the distance, its form dissolving into light. Ezra returned to the ship, exhausted but triumphant. Not bad for a guy who's just here for moral support, he said, collapsing into a chair. Zavara gave him a rare, genuine smile. You continue to exceed expectations, Sergeant Colby. Stick with me, Commander, Ezra said, grinning. I'll teach you all my tricks. As the ship re-entered the rift, leaving the strange dimension behind, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that his journey with the Auran was far from over. The Auran starship drifted in high orbit above an uncharted blue-green world, its shimmering hull reflecting the soft light of a distant star. Inside, the crew bustled about with a focused energy, finalizing preparations for what Zavara had called the moment of reckoning. Ezra leaned against the railing of the observation deck, gazing at the planet below. It reminded him of Earth, though the continents were unfamiliar, and the clouds swirled in patterns he couldn't quite predict. "You've been quiet," Zavara's voice said behind him, soft yet steady. Ezra turned, offering her a lopsided grin. "Just taking it all in. It's not every day you wrap up a tour of duty as an intergalactic house guest/war prize." Zavara's expression flickered with something he couldn't place, an emotion softer than her usual stoic demeanor. "You have grown much since our first encounter, Sergeant Colby," she said, stepping closer. "When I claimed you, I sought to understand humanity through one of its warriors. I did not anticipate that you would teach me to see the universe anew." Ezra laughed, running a hand through his hair. "I'd like to take credit for that, but honestly, half the time I was just winging it." "Perhaps that is your strength," Zavara replied, "to face the unknown with irreverence and courage." How the bridge was alive with activity as the final phase of their mission began. The quantum rift they'd stabilized had left traces of dimensional instability, which the Auran's advanced technology could repair, but it would require precise coordination and a leap of faith. Koresh stood at the central console, his hands moving over the controls with mechanical precision. "We are prepared to deploy the harmonic matrix. However, the process will temporarily disrupt our systems, leaving us vulnerable." Ezra raised a hand. "Define vulnerable. Because if you're about to tell me we're sitting ducks, I need to mentally prepare myself for some heroic last words." Koresh glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "It is unlikely we will encounter additional threats. However, I advise caution." "That's Auran for don't screw this up, isn't it?" Ezra muttered, earning a rare chuckle from one of the nearby technicians. Zavara stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of a true leader. "All systems are to be synchronized. Initiate the matrix on my command." As the ship began its operation, Ezra couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come since being unceremoniously claimed by Zavara. He'd gone from a reluctant prisoner to an accidental diplomat, bridging gaps between two vastly different cultures with humor, heart, and a fair share of improvised chaos. The bond he'd formed with Zavara felt especially significant. She'd started as an enigma, aloof, calculating, and burdened by the weight of command. But over time, he'd seen glimpses of the person beneath the armor, a leader who cared deeply for her people and a woman unafraid to challenge her own beliefs. "Hey, Commander," Ezra said, breaking the tense silence. "After this is all over, what happens to me? Do I get dropped off at the nearest intergalactic bus stop?" Zavara regarded him thoughtfully. "You have proven yourself invaluable to this crew. If you choose to remain, there will always be a place for you among us." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "You saying you're keeping me around for my charm and good looks?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Among other qualities." The harmonic matrix activated with a burst of light, sending waves of energy rippling across the surrounding space. The rift's residual instability began to dissipate, but the process triggered a chain reaction, a sudden surge of gravitational force that rocked the ship. "Koresh!" Zavara barked. "Status report!" "Unexpected dimensional feedback," Koresh said, his hands flying over the controls. Attempting to compensate, Ezra gripped the edge of the console as the ship lurched. "This feels like a bad time to mention I get motion sickness." Zavara's gaze never wavered. "Steady, Sergeant. We will prevail." The ship shuddered again, but this time the energy stabilized. The bridge filled with a collective sigh of relief as the system indicators shifted from red to green. "The rift is fully neutralized," Koresh reported. "The dimensional anomalies have been contained." Ezra let out a whoop, throwing his arms in the air. "We did it, and no one got turned into a sentient puddle. I call that a win." Zavara allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Indeed. Well done, everyone. And the celebration in the communal hall that evening was unlike anything Ezra had experienced. The usually reserved Orin were jubilant, their glowing forms pulsing with rhythmic energy as they danced, laughed, and shared stories. Ezra found himself at the center of the revelry, teaching yet another round of human dance moves to a group of enthusiastic warriors. "You're a natural, Lether," he said, clapping the young warrior on the back. "Keep practicing, and you'll be the galaxy's first Orin pop star." Lether tilted his head. "Pop star?" Ezra grinned. "I'll explain later. For now, just focus on the moonwalk." As the festivities wound down, Ezra stepped outside to the observation deck, needing a moment of quiet. The stars stretched endlessly before him, a reminder of how vast and unpredictable the universe truly was. Zavara joined him, her presence steady and reassuring. "You seem pensive," she observed. "Just thinking," Ezra said, his voice softer than usual. "About everything we've been through, about what's next." Zavara studied him for a moment. "And what have you concluded?" Ezra hesitated, then smiled. "That maybe being a war prize wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me." Zavara's expression softened. "You have taught me much, Sergeant Colby, about humanity, about myself, and about the value of laughter in the face of adversity." "Glad I could help," Ezra said, leaning against the railing. "So, what now, Commander?" "That depends," Zavara said, her tone laced with something almost playful. "Do you wish to remain with us? Or would you prefer to return to your people?" Ezra looked out at the stars, his grin widening. "You kidding? I'm just getting started." Zavara chuckled softly, and for a brief moment, the weight of the universe seemed to lift. Together, they stood in silence, two unlikely allies brought together by fate, ready to face whatever the stars had in store. The universe, after all, was full of surprises, and for the first time in a long time, Ezra felt ready to embrace them.